My parents cut me out of their will after I paid their bills for 3 years, so I canceled every payment and went on a trip to Thailand instead. They called me the responsible one while I paid their bills. Then I found the will and realized I didn't even exist in their future. I, a 34-year-old woman, come from what I believed was a fairly close-knit family, middle-class suburbia, the entire American dream package deal. My parents are in their early 60s, my brother Jacob is 36. And then there's Jessica. We are not the Hallmark movie kind, where everyone hugs and expresses their emotions. We're more the type that communicates through passive-aggressive comments about one another's life choices over dry turkey on Thanksgiving. But I've always assumed we had each other's backs when it counted. To put things in perspective, I've always been the responsible one. I had good grades, attended a state college, and secured a steady career in pharmaceutical research. It doesn't get me invited to expensive cocktail parties, but I pay my bills and have my life in order. Jacob, on the other hand, has always been the ideal child. He attended a more prestigious college, which my parents helped pay for, whereas I took out debts that I'll most likely still be paying off when I'm in adult diapers. He earned an MBA and now works at a software startup where he makes a nice living, but he still manages to be too busy whenever my parents require practical assistance. It's interesting how being busy forces you to be choosy. Growing up, our duties were rather well defined. Jacob was the star, and his football games and debate tournaments required family outings. Meanwhile, I once won a statewide scientific competition, but my parents missed it because Dad had a golf game and Mom had a hair appointment. When I arrived home with my trophy, Mom simply responded, "That's nice, honey. Did you remember to defrost the chicken for dinner?" Cool, but I wasn't bitter. Okay, perhaps a little bitter, like lemon peel that has been left in the sun for a week. But I handled it. I assumed that was just how families worked. Someone gets to be the star, and someone else gets to be whatever I was, the supporting role, the sidekick, or the chicken defrosting champion. I moved out at 18 for college, worked 2 jobs while taking full-time classes, and finished with honors. My graduation party was at Denny's, breakfast, and my father spent the majority of the time talking about Jacob's new condo in Chicago. Jacob wasn't present, he was networking in Cabo. Apparently tequila shots and sunburn are important job development tools. Who knew? After college, I worked at a pharmaceutical research company, starting at the bottom and working my way up to senior researcher. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. Good benefits, a 401k, and the usual boring adult package. I bought a little condo, acquired a cat named Professor Nibbles. I was high when I signed the adoption papers, and settled into a peaceful but fulfilling life. Jacob, meanwhile, hopped between sexy-sounding roles at firms like Blascor and Nexify, which appear to specialize in producing branded hoodies and press releases about disrupting industries that didn't need to be disrupted. He lived in high-end downtown apartments, dated Instagram models, and always appeared to be on the verge of success. By the way, what about the big making? It never really happened. But my parents were persuaded that it was just around the corner. So this is when things get crazy. My father experienced a health scare about 3 years ago. It was nothing serious in the end, but it was enough to land him in the hospital for a few days. Mom was a mess. So I took time off work to handle everything. Hospital paperwork, insurance calls, bringing Mom food that wasn't radioactive cafeteria muck, walking their dog, and so on. Jacob sent flowers and called once, because nothing screams "I care" like a $50 bouquet and a 3-minute phone call while you're most likely taking a poo. During that hospital stay, I remember sitting in Dad's room while he slept. Mom had gone home to shower, so I was catching up on work emails. Dad awoke after midnight, bewildered. "Jessica," he said, "where's Jacob?" "He's in Boston, Dad, for work, remember? He called earlier." Dad nodded slowly. "He's doing so well, isn't he? Such a good son." I simply smiled and helped him take a sip of water. Whatever. Dad was taking pain medication. I was not going to get into it. After Dad recovered, they began talking a lot about getting their affairs in order and ensuring that everything was correctly set up. I didn't think much about it. It appeared sensible following a health scare. Then I started noticing small details. Dad requested me to assist set up automatic payments for their bills because technology is confusing. This from a man who worked as an electrical engineer for 30 years but suddenly forgot how buttons operate. Mom called to ask if I could help with their property taxes because they were a little short this year. The requests became increasingly frequent. Cable bill, water bill, new roof, plumber. Every time it was just temporary, or just this once. But it eventually became my normal position. I was essentially financing their lifestyle while working full-time and saving for my own future. You know, the future when I can retire before I'm 97 and possibly afford both rent and avocado toast in the same month. When they first begged for financial assistance, I was really concerned. My parents had always been financially responsible. Dad's engineering career had been well compensated, and Mom's part-time work as a school secretary had provided a decent second income. They owned their home outright and were saving for retirement. What has changed? We're just in a bit of a tight spot, Mom responded vaguely when I questioned. Investments, you know, the market. I did not push it. Perhaps they had made some questionable investing decisions. Perhaps their retirement assets had taken a hit. This happens. They'd also helped me out when I needed it, such as when my car broke down in college and I couldn't afford the repairs. They sent me $800 with no questions asked. It was my turn to help them out, except, it didn't stop. The requests began tiny. $200 here for an unexpectedly high power bill, $350 there for car repairs, but quickly increased. Property taxes, insurance payments, a new water heater, new windows, and a kitchen remodel that evolved from, we're just updating the countertops, to, we need all new appliances and custom cabinets. Meanwhile, Jacob would come in for holidays, bringing lavish gifts and spinning stories about his business adventures, and my parents would gobble it up. Jacob is doing so wonderfully. Jacob recently received a promotion. Jacob is considering purchasing a vacation property. Yeah, it's easy when you're not spending $800 every month on someone else's bills. It's amazing how much disposable income you have when you're not depositing it into your parents' bank accounts. I tried to keep track of how much I was feeding them, but it just got away from me. Between the automatic payments I'd set up and the random emergency demands, I was probably handing them $1,000 to $1,500 every month. That isn't pocket change. That is a mortgage payment. That is a nice automobile. That is a yearly vacation to a place that requires a passport and does not have bed bugs. But every time I began to question it, to wonder if I should be saving that money for myself instead, the guilt set in. They were my parents. They had nurtured, fed, clothed, and cared for me when I was unwell. How could I not assist them when they needed it? So I kept paying, helping, and being the responsible party. I reduced my personal spending by canceling my gym membership, switching from the expensive salon to Great Clips for haircuts, and meal prepping pitiful little containers of rice and chicken instead of going out to lunch. I told myself it was only temporary, until they got back on their feet. At first, I didn't mind helping out. They're my parents, you know. But something about the circumstance felt odd, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Like when you walk into a room and forget why you're there. Except that the room is your family dynamic, and what you forgot is your self-esteem. Then, around 6 months ago, my mother texted me, inviting me to a Zoom meeting on family financial planning that weekend. I hoped that they would eventually acknowledge all of my assistance and devise a fair system. Perhaps some sort of, thanks for keeping our lights on for the past 3 years, you're the best daughter ever, acceptance speech. A girl can dream. I arrived 5 minutes early, dressed in a good blouse and combed hair, and appeared to be a responsible adult who did not eat cereal for dinner standing over the sink. Mom and Dad joined next. Jacob came in last, looking like he had just stepped out of a J. Crew catalog. Neatly ironed button-downs, artistically tousled hair, the kind of casual expense that costs a lot of money and time to create. "Hey everyone," he said, flashing that white striped smile. "Let me just share my screen." Jacob actually ran the entire presentation, sharing his screen with PowerPoint slides about estate planning and wealth management. My parents simply nodded along as he discussed their home, investments, and retirement funds. Jacob had seemingly landed a side employment as a financial advisor infomercial host, based on his delivery. "As you can see," Jacob explained, referring to a pie chart that made about as much sense to me as quantum physics, "we can restructure the portfolio to maximize growth, while providing necessary liquidity for current expenses." Mom and Dad were nodding like the bobblehead dogs that people place in their vehicle windows. They didn't understand what he was saying. I could tell since I've noticed the same nodding when I try to explain my study to them. They're sporting the, we're pretending to follow, but actually thinking about what's for dinner facial expressions. The strangest part was that my name was not mentioned once during the entire call. Not once. I sat there on mute, seeing my own face fade into the corner of the screen as they talked about the future as if I didn't exist. I was the digital equivalent of a houseplant during the meeting. Actually no. Houseplants are watered and acknowledged on occasion. Slide after slide of financial jargon, estimates, figures, and recommendations. Nobody said, "And of course we need to factor in all the support Jessica has been providing." No one said, "We should probably stop relying on Jessica's income." I was invisible, a ghost, the financial equivalent of a Victorian child, expected to provide but never speak. Until the very end, when Mom abruptly added, "Oh, and Jessica, the property tax bill is coming up again. We're counting on you for that, sweetheart. You've always been so reliable." That was my role. The reliable one. The person who pays bills. The human ATM. Jessica is making family finances happen, but without the benefit of a commercial break. I unmuted just long enough to respond. Sure, Mom. Then excused myself with a work call and checked out before anyone could see the tears of frustration welling up in my eyes. Following the call, I felt hollow. Something was not adding up. Jacob had never assisted them with their finances before, so why was he suddenly so involved? Why did they plan everything around him? And why did they still expect me to pay their bills? It's as if they were throwing a party for which I paid but was not invited to attend. I began paying closer attention, watching and listening. That's when I started noticing weirder stuff. Jacob is receiving mortgage-related mail at their home. Dad mentioned casually that Jacob had taken him to meet with their financial consultant. Mom asked me to help her download an app that would allow Jacob to see their bank accounts, simply to keep an eye on things. Because it appears that having two people with access to your accounts is preferable to having one. One Sunday I dropped by their house unannounced with some handmade cookies because I'm still a nice daughter, dang it, even when I'm skeptical. They were gone, but Jacob's car was in the driveway. I opened the door with my key and called out as I entered. No response. I moved towards the kitchen and heard Jacob's voice coming from Dad's home office. He was on the phone. Just need to finalize the transfer, he said. Once the house is in the trust, we can... He paused when he noticed me in the doorway. Got to go, he hastily whispered into the phone before hanging up. Hey sis, he remarked casually, as if I hadn't just overheard him discussing the transfer of my parents' house. What's up? I lifted the jar and added, just bring some cookies. What are you doing here? Just helping Dad organize some paperwork. He pointed vaguely at the desk, which was covered with folders and records. Boring stuff? What kind of boring stuff? You know, financial stuff, estate planning, nothing interesting. I nodded slowly. Need any help? I'm pretty good with organizing. He shook his head hurriedly. Too quick. Nah. I got it. Dad and I have a system going. A system that apparently excluded me. I began to feel as if I were in some strange gaslighty thriller film, where everyone else knows something. You don't. The Sixth Sense. Except instead of seeing dead people, I was the only one who didn't realize I was being played. Then, 2 months ago, I discovered it. I was assisting Mom hunt for a receipt in her home office when I noticed a folder called Will Final 2023. I realize I shouldn't have looked, but wouldn't you? If you're thinking, no, I wouldn't, congratulations on your moral superiority. But you're also lying. I waited until Mom went to answer the phone before pulling the folder out. My hands were very shaking. I felt like a child sneaking a glimpse at Christmas presents. However, instead of hoping for a PlayStation, I hoped I hadn't been utterly removed from my parents' lives. Inside was their amended will, which had been completed and notarized only 3 months before. And guess what? Everything was going to Jacob. The house, the money, Dad's vintage record collection, Mom's jewelry. All of it. Even the dang dog. There was also a letter explaining their decision. Jacob has exhibited financial savvy and accountability. We believe he is best suited to administer our estate and legacy. Not a word about me. Not a single word. No explanation for why I received nothing. Not even a sentimental object or family photo book. I didn't even receive the participation award for inheriting. Apparently, my 3-year financial support subscription did not include legacy access. I felt like I had been hit in the stomach. The room truly spun for a second. I had to sit down, the paper crumpled in my trembling palms. This couldn't be correct. There had to be an error. Perhaps another document. Another will. Something that explained why I had been entirely wiped. But there wasn't. Page after page explaining how Jacob would get everything. How he would handle the estate, and how he would carry on their legacy. While I presumably would receive nothing beyond the satisfaction of knowing I had helped pay their retirement while being written out of their existence. I returned everything precisely how I found it, without saying a word. But within, I was screaming. All the bills I'd been paying. All those times I'd turned up when they needed assistance. I skipped all of my trips because I was sending them money instead, and this is how they saw me, as nothing. I could have set myself on fire to keep them warm, but they'd complain about the smoke damage. I drove home in a trance, unsure what to do. Confront them? Demand an explanation? Beg for inclusion? Write a letter that is firmly written? Hire a skywriter to spell what the fudge over their house? That night, I was unable to sleep. I continued running over the last 3 years in my brain. All the checks I'd written, all the automated payments I'd set up, and all the times I'd reached into my money to assist them. And for what? To be erased? To be nothing. I brought out my bank statements and began totaling up the payments. Over 3 years, I had given them more than $40,000. $40,000. That's a down payment for a house. That is a master's degree. That's a tremendously fantastic car. Or a rather mediocre boat. And they didn't even bother leaving me a coffee mug in their will. I chose to wait. To watch. To see if they'd ever tell me, and whether they believed I deserved to know. And that's when I made a decision that could get me in trouble. I did not tell them what I know, I did not challenge them, I just quit. I stopped answering when they called about invoices, stopped sending money. They stopped relying on me for support. I stopped putting myself on fire to keep others warm who weren't even thankful for the heat. I promised myself I would give them 3 months. 3 months to either come clean or prove to me that I was worth more than my money. 3 months to see whether they'd realize I was backing away. To my amazement, they did not. Instead, the requests simply became more demanding, entitled, and needy. The financial equivalent of a kid throwing a tantrum in the candy aisle. Jessica, your electricity bill is past due. When will you send the money? Jessica, we need the property taxes paid by Friday. Jessica, have you forgotten about the cable bill? Your dad is missing his shows. No one asked if I was okay, if anything had happened, or if I needed assistance with a change. They were so far up their own asses that they could see their tonsils. And Jacob? The radio is silent. Apparently the family financial manager was not concerned with day-to-day expenses. It's surprising that financial knowledge does not extend to actually paying for items. Around a month into my financial strike, I went to their place for dinner. Mom had called and expressly requested that I come over. We need to talk about something, she said, which typically means we need you to write a check for something. I didn't want to go, but I went regardless because obviously I am a masochist. Perhaps I was still hoping that they would notice that something was incorrect, that they'd inquire whether I was all right, that they'd acknowledge me as a person with feelings, rather than just a handy ATM with legs. Dinner was as typical, with conversations dominated by Jacob's newest accomplishments, even if he wasn't present. Dad mentioned Jacob's interest in investing in a new technology startup. Mom added that Jacob had sent them a gift basket from an expensive place I couldn't afford to buy at. Then, as I was helping to clear the dishes, Mom exclaimed, "Oh Jessica, the property tax bill arrived yesterday. It's $3,200 this year. Can you take care of it by Friday?" Just like that. No please. There was no acknowledgement that she was asking me for $3,000. There was no recognition that I had been ignoring their payment solicitations for several weeks, just the assumption that I would pay, and that is what I did. That was my role. The accountable one. The wallet. "I can't this month," I responded, keeping my tone neutral as I rinsed a plate. Mom froze, sponge in hand. "What are you saying you can't?" "I actually can't. I'm facing some money problems of my own. This is not a lie. My financial dilemma was that I had been losing money to them for years. But this is crucial, Jessica. It's a property tax. If we do not pay, we will face penalties." I shrugged. "I'm confident Jacob can help. He's doing so well, with his financial knowledge and everything." Mom's expression became convoluted, as if she were attempting to answer a tough math problem. "Jacob? But he doesn't. We don't ask Jacob for money." "Why not?" "Because he is busy. He has his own expenses and life." "So I don't?" Mom looked perplexed, as if I had suddenly begun speaking Klingon. "That is different. You're the responsible one. Does that mean I'm also responsible for your bills? We've also assisted you, you know. Do you remember when you needed money for car maintenance in college? We sent it right away. No questions asked." I had to giggle about that. "Mom, it was $800. Like 15 years ago. I have given you tens of thousands of cash since then. It's not the same thing." Mom's expression tightened. "I didn't realize you were keeping score. And that was all. The moment I knew nothing will change." They saw no difficulty with the arrangement. They didn't understand why I was backing off. In their minds, this was exactly the way things should be. I pay. They take. Jacob finally gets everything. The circle of financial dysfunction. I dried my hands with a dish towel and grabbed my purse. I should go. "But what about property taxes?" Mom called after me as I approached the door. I only turned back long enough to reply, "Not my problem." I walked out. Then, 3 weeks ago, Mom called and invited me to join them for lunch. "We need to talk about something important," she told me. My heart actually skipped. Was that it? Would they tell me about the will? Apologize? Maybe you could donate me a kidney. At this time, I would have accepted any organ recognition. I arrived at the restaurant early, feeling worried but excited. They arrived 20 minutes late, with Jacob in tow. We ordered, then spoke about the weather in Mom's garden. Then, when our lunch arrived, Mom cleared her throat and remarked, "Jessica dear, we wanted to speak with you about the bills. We have seen that you have not been keeping up with things lately." I waited. Surely this was the prelude to the actual conversation. "We apologize for treating you like an unpaid utility service." Dad jumped in. "We recognize that everyone goes through tough circumstances. If you were suffering financial issues, you should have told us. We are family." I almost choked on my water. They were discussing financial concerns with me, despite the fact that I had been supporting their lifestyle for years. The irony was thick enough to ice a cake. But I maintained my calm. "I'm doing well, actually. I'm just reassessing my budget." Translation: moving monies from the bank of enabling you to the republic of taking care of myself for once. Mom seemed relieved. "Okay, good. So you'll pay the electricity bill this week? It's been 2 months, and they're threatening to disconnect my service." Jacob, who had hitherto been silent, added, "It's critical to stay on top of these issues, Lee. Financial responsibility is critical." I stared at him. Then I looked at my parents. Were they for real? Was this really happening? Did I have an aneurysm? Was I pranked? Where were the concealed cameras? Jacob continued, warming up to his topic. "I've been looking at Mom and Dad's whole financial situation, and I'm concerned. Their retirement planning requires careful thought. That is why I've been stepping in to assist and manage things." "Manage things?" I repeated. "Do they like paying their bills?" He had the grace to appear slightly uncomfortable. "Well, no, not the daily expenses. It's more about the big picture, like investing and estate planning." "The future," I repeated, and that's when Mom dropped the bomb, casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Oh, and while we have you both here, we recently updated our will. Jacob will handle everything once the time comes. With his financial expertise, he is simply more suited to the task. We know you understand, Jessica. You've always been very practical." They'd planned it. I waited until a public spot. I brought Jacob as a backup. They never meant to apologize or explain. This lunch was not to be clean. It was to ensure that I continued to pay their bills, even though they had cut me out of their future plans. It was a response to my sudden surge of financial self-esteem. I sat there, fork halfway in my mouth, as the entire realization poured over me. I wasn't family. I was a utility, a service, a means to an objective. I was not a daughter. I was walking, discussing direct deposit. I lowered my fork carefully, took a sip of water, and set a 20 on the table for my dinner. "I think I should go," I murmured gently. "But you've barely touched your food," Mom insisted. I simply gazed at her. I really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. "I'm not hungry anymore. Not for food. Not for the emotional scraps they were tossing my way." As I stood to leave, Dad yelled after me. "So, about that electric bill?" I turned back just long enough to say, "I'm sure Jacob can handle it. He's better positioned for that kind of thing." Throwing their remarks back at them felt great, like returning a decade's worth of Christmas fruitcakes at once. I walked out. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not send angry text messages or make theatrical phone calls. I just walked home, sat down at my computer, and carefully withdrew myself from their financial lives with the accuracy of a surgeon removing a tumor. I canceled every automatic payment I had set up. I closed all joint accounts. I contacted every utility company and deleted my name as an approved payer. I emailed their HOA to inform them that I would no longer be paying the dues. I even contacted their lawn service to discontinue the monthly maintenance that I had been paying for. I checked every T, dotted every I, and severed every financial cord with the same care as someone closing their tabs after a night of drinking. Except that I was finally sobering up. The delight I felt with each cancellation, removal and deletion was alarming. To be honest, it felt too good. Like I was finally regaining control of something that had gotten away from me. Each click, call, and confirmation email added another brick to the wall I was constructing between myself and their financial exploitation. Then I blocked their numbers. Not permanently, but just for a week. I needed time to ponder without the guilt trips and demands. Like a financial cleanse. For a week I felt odd. Lighter in some aspects, yet heavier in others. I expected to feel guilty, but instead I felt sad. It's unfortunate that the family I believed I had didn't exist. I was sad that I had wasted so many years attempting to earn affection that should have been unconditional. You should not have to pay for your seat at the family table. When I unblocked their numbers, the texts poured in. Confused at first, then concerned, then angry. But not worried about me. Concerned about bills, payments, and services. My favorite was Dad's. The internet is down. How should I watch my YouTube videos? I do not know, Dad. Maybe rub two sticks together to see if Netflix comes. I did not respond to any of them. What was there to say? Sorry, your human ATM developed a spine. 2 weeks have gone by. Then 3. I concentrated on myself for once. I started looking at my personal money and was astonished to find how much I'd been giving out all these years. Thousands. Most likely tens of thousands. In certain areas, enough money has accumulated over time to purchase a tiny house. If boomers are correct about millennial purchasing tendencies, that equates to around 8,000 avocado toasts. I started therapy. I started spending money on myself without remorse. I joined a gym. I scheduled a hair appointment at a salon that didn't clip pets' fur. I bought new sheets with a thread count that didn't make it feel like I was sleeping on sandpaper. After years of sacrificing pennies to make my parents' lives comfortable, these small luxuries felt gigantic. The calls and texts kept pouring, becoming more urgent. Mom went from angry to guilty. I'm not sure why you're doing this to us after all we've done for you. Dad was more forthright. You need to start paying these bills again. This is unacceptable behavior. Then yesterday I received the text I had been waiting for. From my mother. The electricity is out. Did you forget to pay? Number, I miss you? Number, can we speak? Number. There is no acknowledgement of what transpired during lunch. Just the presumption that I would continue to pay. Keep repairing. Keep being the ATM. She could as well have texted, money please. Like Mona Lisa from Parks and Recreation. I glanced at the message for a long time before typing back. No, I remembered exactly what you said. Then I switched off my phone and went to bed. I slept like a baby actually. The kind of sleep you get after putting down a backpack full of rocks that you've been hauling uphill for years. I awoke this morning to 37 missed calls and a voicemail from my father, who was ranting about responsibility and family obligation. But here's the part where I might become the evil guy. I knew they didn't have enough money to pay the electricity bill. I knew their power would be cut off if I didn't intervene. And I did nothing. In fact, I traveled to their area around the time I realized the power company would be there to disconnect electricity. Parked across the street. I watched as the utility van pulled up. I watched as the worker got out, walked to the meter, and performed whatever they needed to do to turn off the power. I watched the lights in my parents' house go out. I sat there, sipping my coffee and feeling nothing. There is no guilt. There's no sadness. Just a serene assurance that this was the logical outcome of their decisions. They had used me. They took me for granted. And now they were learning what life was like without their own ATM. My parents stepped outdoors, both on their phones. I could see them pointing, most likely leaving me more panicked voicemails. Dad paced the driveway. Mom sat on the porch steps, head in hands. I should have felt something. Right? Guilt? Remorse? The overpowering desire to get in and fix everything. But I only felt relief. I was relieved that I was no longer responsible. I was relieved that I wouldn't have to keep putting myself on fire to keep them warm. Maybe they are right. Maybe I'm the terrible guy for leaving them in the dark, rather than simply paying the bill one more time. Perhaps I should have tackled them directly, rather than giving them this silent treatment. After years of being responsible, reliable, and a fixer, I am exhausted. I'm just really exhausted. There's only so many times you can be the family doormat before you realize you're being stepped on. Yes. After 2 weeks, their power was eventually restored. Jacob eventually stepped up and paid the amount after 3 days. 3 days passed before Mr. Financial Acumen chose to handle a simple utility payment. I guess his PowerPoint talents aren't applicable to paying utility bills. Who knew? The 3 days were interesting. I received hourly calls and texts, each more urgent than the last. Dad threatened to contact the police and denounce me for elder abuse. Mom alternated between guilt trips. I can't believe you'd let your own folks suffer. And manipulation. We'll have to sell our jewels to pay expenses. Jacob alternated between angry emails accusing me of being heartless and desperate messages asking me to simply pay the bill one more time and we'd figure it out. I did not respond to any of them. I kept reminding myself of my willpower. Of being written out of existence but still expected to support their lifestyle. Years of being taken for granted. It was like a mantra, keeping me going when my resolve began to waver. On day 3, the calls ceased, the texts stopped. They all maintained radio silence. I was frightened enough to drive past their residence that evening. The lights came back on. Jacob's automobile was in the driveway. I later learned that he had finally stepped up and paid the electricity bill. Then I spent the evening explaining to my parents that perhaps they shouldn't have relied on me for money all these years while preparing to leave everything to him. Apparently, there was a lot of yelling, crying, denial, and justification. But Jessica never seemed to mind. Second, I received a handwritten letter from my mother yesterday. Not an email or text, but an actual letter, demonstrating how serious this is because my mother despises writing anything by hand. I believe mother complained about hand cramps the last time she wrote something by hand, which was most likely my birth certificate. The letter was more of a confused attempt to explain what happened than an apology. She responded that they'd always considered me as the strong one, and had no intention of taking advantage. She claimed they didn't inform me about the will, because they didn't want to upset me and assumed I wouldn't be concerned with material things, as if being written out of existence is somehow a tribute to my spiritual character. Thank you, Mom. I will pay my rent with enlightenment. The true bomb was the final paragraph. We always relied on you since you were the only person we could trust. Jacob could appear wonderful on paper, but you were our rock. So I was trustworthy enough to pay their expenses, but not with their legacy. Nice. I'm dependable enough to pay for their retirement, but not enough to inherit the spoils of it. Make sure it makes sense. I have not yet responded. I'm still deciding what to say, or whether to say anything at all. I'm currently divided between writing K on a blank sheet of paper and sending a bill for all the money I've spent over the years, with interest. Oh, and Jacob called me too. Take this. He claimed he had no idea how much I had been paying. He assumed I was only assisting with odd bills, not practically subsidizing their entire existence. When I told him how much I'd been providing them monthly, $1,350 on average, he stopped talking for the first time in his life. Have you been paying that much each month? He finally inquired. For 3 years? I replied, while you were busy creating PowerPoint presentations about their estate that I would not be able to participate in? He had the decency to sound embarrassed. I knew you helped them out occasionally, but not like this. They told me it was simply minor details. Well, now you know, I replied. And now it's your turn. He remained mute. So where are things now? I'm still not sending money. I'm still analyzing my feelings about everything. And I'm still figuring out what type of relationship I want to have with my family in the future, if any. Right now, I'm going towards a Christmas card from a different state level of communication. But I know one thing for certain. I never regret standing up for myself. Not for 1 second. It turns out that my spine functions perfectly once I decide to use it. Thank you for the validation. Strangers on the internet might sometimes help you realize you're not insane for wanting basic decency and respect from your own family. The bar was so low that it was nearly a trip hazard in hell. They still found a way to limbo beneath it. P.S. For those who are curious about therapy, yes, I have begun talking to someone. The first session was yesterday. My therapist's eye twitched only 3 times during my story, which I consider a success. P.P.S. To the person who suggested I spend the money I'm saving to go on a fantasy vacation instead, I've already bought tickets to Thailand for next month. This is the first huge thing I've ever done for myself. Going to get one of those shirts that say, "My parents wrote me out of their will, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt, emotional trauma, and a trip to Thailand."